Welcome back to Oneself. My name is Stephen Maher. With me today, with me always, is Adam Bartleman. Adam, thank you so much for joining me today, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah, folks, we want to talk about something that we've noticed in kind of the new age spiritual communities. A lot of you, if you've been listening, you know my history with organized religion, growing up in the Catholic Church, and kind of the issues that I see there. Something I've quoted before that kind of Adam gets a kick out of. There's no hate quite like Christian love, right? And so there's problems. There's problems with Christianity that I've seen, that I've experienced, that I've grown up in. You're given this message of love while also at the same time um, being rooted in fear, right? Be afraid to go to hell, be afraid to do all these things, be afraid to commit sin. In my upbringing, right? In the Catholic Church, I know not all of the denominations of Christianity believe in that sort of thing, right? So I understand that. But so we've talked about that, right? We've covered that. And, I've noticed, or Adam and I have noticed that there's a lot of people going towards kind of this new age spirituality, which we both felt drawn to at different times in our life. And I think that's really great. I think that's a really cool thing that people are not necessarily, agnostic or atheist, which, to each their own. More power to you if that's where you stand in life. I get it. I was that for a long time as well. I'd say my younger 20s and mid 20s, and just really wanted nothing to do with any of that sort of stuff. But then kind of came to the conclusion, y'all, that there's definitely more to the universe, to the world. There's something more going on here that we don't quite understand. And if you think that people, or if you think we do understand everything, I just pose the question, uh, you know, just look at the stars, man. You know what I mean? Just look at the stars and their infiniteness, and how vast this universe is, and we can't possibly comprehend everything that's going on around us. There's just no way. It's just too big, and that's okay. I think part of the reason we're here as humans is just to experience a little piece of it, and and learn from that. So all that being said, to say that Adam and I had our experiences with this new age spirituality, and there's problems with that too, just like how there's problems that we've seen, or that I've seen and experienced within Catholicism, within Christianity, and there's hypocrisy there as well. And we just want to talk about it, bring awareness to it, and hopefully see what other people think about that. If something resonates, or any of that sort of thing, call attention to it. So, Adam, without further ado, I'm going to just say our first point, and I think
Mm.
let's just chop it up a little bit. Share your perspective with me on it. So, often, people in spiritual communities, they prioritize like performance over the actual growth of their soul. You know, um, I've seen men use this performative thing to try and get women. To kind of be like a spiritual sexual predator, which is like that's like a known thing now. If you see,
Mm.
there's weird cults that have been started for less. Charles Manson, is kind of like this hippie dude coming out of the 60s and 70s, and
Yeah.
then like use that shit to just warp people's minds, and use psychedelics to warp people's minds as well. There's a lot of acid involved, I'm sure, within
Mm.
the Manson family. Um, but yeah, so it's like, I see a lot of men, kind of, yeah, the white clothing, the long hair, the beard, kind of like chasing Jesus, like this Jesus
Yeah.
aesthetic in this like new age spirituality, which is interesting, right? Because it's like,
Yeah.
why, everything that I learned from Jesus is like he doesn't want us to like idolize him, or be like him. I think he would find it weird that we have entire churches built around his body on a cross, and
Mm.
like it's just like it's kind of weird, right? If we think about it for a little bit, yeah, man. So I want to get your thoughts on that. It's just like, what do you think of this like performative nature of that we see in this like new age spirituality, where it's not actually truly taking accountability or personal growth? There are people that are, right? I know you've had that experience. When I've been in those areas, there are people doing good work, but then there's a lot of people that are just performing like they are.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the same. It's the same thing, different day, or just the same problem dressed up in a slightly different costume. It's just like uh, any pastor or reverend or whatever that's not in alignment. it's not that they're necessarily doing it from a place of malice. It's like most things, is from a place of ignorance, and turning this lens on ourselves as well, to constantly be looking to see if we're moving in integrity. But it's for that particular conversation, it's just kind of like the pastor who's in it for the money, or the priest who's using their their position or their appearance or their reputation in order to manipulate other people. Whether it's being done unconsciously or consciously. So it's kind of one of those things, like, we just when we try so hard to rebel against something by seeing it as external rather than an internal problem, we end up staying at the same level, just going to the other end of the polarity and thinking that we've done something. So, going from, like in that example, going from being the well-dressed, prim and proper churchgoer to the long-haired kind of hippie spiritual person, like,
Which I've been both.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's like, not there's anything wrong with either of those things, or there's nothing wrong with anyone's expression, and that's all part of the journey of coming to a greater awareness. So it's not like, observing someone on their path and saying it's wrong, but just making observations to see where perhaps we could be in greater alignment with where it is we say we're trying to go. So yeah, if it becomes about the aesthetic, for example, then if that's all it's about, if it's like, well, I need the long hair and I need to be barefoot, I need to be wearing beads and covered in tattoos in my case. If that's like so important, then I think that's time to check in and realize we're missing the point,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. 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 And yeah, and it's, I think, we've mentioned this, where it's like this, you would think that these communities, or, those groups of people, are like super welcoming and super loving, when oftentimes it's like, oh, like, you get to know some of them, and it's like they're, cliquey, judgmental, just as the rest of us. It's like, that's not a place of truth necessarily, oftentimes. Not that there aren't great teachers doing good work in some of those spaces, but it's just like, yeah, it's like, it's a performance of, like, there was this guy I met, dude, down there, and kind of like, or just, in one of those communities, and like, he was the DJ, the long hair, like, the, like, performative to the nines, like the clothing, and I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
like, this guy just sucks, dude. Like, I talked to him a couple times, and it was just like, and then, because it got brought up that, I was living in Maine, and he was like, oh yeah, like, my buddy offered me a job as like this, like, sort of salesman. He was like, I could be making all this money, and and I was just like, wait. So, like, what is this then? Like, what are you doing? Like, dressed up in
Mm.
the clothing, and you like literally walking around with like his DJ disc, like his technology, like just walking around with it. Like, I'm just like so performative with it. And
That's,
I was like, so this is all an act, right? If you want to, like, just go back to the States and just make a bunch of money, like, what is this chapter of you? Like, what else, like,
mm.
what else is not authentic or real? And that's just a little anecdote of, and I just, oh man, I just did not like his energy. I'm just like getting a little, it was just, yeah, it was just fake, right? It was just fake. I was like, you're not a real person, dude. Like, you're a performance, like, this guy was just a performance of, what he thinks it should be. But then you look at the character of the person, and you get to know the character of the person, and it's just like, there's no substance there in my
Mm.
experience with that. And that's just one little anecdote of,
Yeah.
sticking out in my mind over a bunch, because it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, it's like the off, these people aren't, and I was one of them, y'all. Like, it's like, it's like, judge not lest ye be judged, right? And like, I was
Bingo.
one of them. So it's like,
Yeah.
I'm judging myself when I'm saying these things, because like, I was that for a little bit. I had the long hair, and I'll take some of those things, right? Like, I do like walking around barefoot, dude.
Me
But
too.
yeah, like,
Yeah.
it's great. Like, I do like to get
Yeah.
grounded, but
Yeah.
maybe that's a good segue into our next point, which is just like the hygiene thing. Like, when I do walk around barefoot, dude, like, I am gonna wash myself, like, if
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
if I'm gross, because as Adam has mentioned, like there's this thing that we've noticed too, where it's just the poor hygiene in some of these areas.
Mm.
And we're around some of those people, and again, we've been those people, but it's like you can smell people from 15 feet out. And
Yeah.
I got a sensitive nose, y'all. Like, it's like, with the half blindness in my other eye, like all my other senses I think have just been forced to be heightened to compensate for the lack of vision. Right. And so, yeah, man, I've smelled some gnarly people,
Yeah,
walking
dude.
around,
Yeah.
and I don't know what that is, like why that has been attached to the
Yeah.
performance that we're talking about, of this new age spirituality. But
Yeah.
and I get I see the perspective of it where Adam, you mentioned this, where it's like, there's a ton of chemicals in the products we put on our skin or our soaps, even like Dove soap, y'all, like, just like a
Yeah.
household brand of Dove soap. I don't think is great for your skin. I
Don't
don't think is
forget
don't fuck
that.
with that, right? How many lawsuits has Johnson and Johnson been
Yeah.
involved in with like baby powder, like the things that we think are like good products for us that are just full of bullshit. That Adam, like you mentioned, like endocrine disruptors and
Yeah.
hormones, just disrupting our bodily functions, and but that's not to say that there aren't like natural soaps with like,
Healthy
yeah,
alternatives.
healthy alternatives with essential oil, deodorant without, the aluminum and, all
Yeah.
the other
Yeah.
bullshit in it. And so it's like, I see the perspective, right? I understand some of it where it's like, I'd rather not put any of those chemicals in my body.
Yeah.
Totally get that. I'm there too, but I'm like, there's also like these alternatives to, to put in our bodies, right? To put
Yeah.
in our bodies. And, yeah, like we're at an age where again, I referenced my book before where like Shogun, and I was reading, I finished the second one, so I'm on to the third book in the series. And the guy was an Englishman from the 1600s, and like medieval Europe like did not care about hygiene, especially London at that time, like disgusting, like would throw like you know um would throw stuff in the streets that's like poop and piss and like all that stuff like just disgusting in the cities, right? That's how people got sick. And then he goes to Japan, which at that time was super hygienic, frequent bathing, and
Mm.
they're like, oh my god, like these, they're, because the Portuguese were there at the time, they're like, the Portuguese like stink, like
Mm.
like
Yeah.
they were always mentioning that. So just as an a historical topical example of this, where it's like that affects the people around you, when you're not considerate of taking care of your own body, and and your own hygiene. And yeah, brother, that's my little tangent on that. You got any thoughts on that as well when it comes to like, yeah, just this hygiene thing?
Well, it's kind of like the same thing as the aesthetic or the performative, like, aspect of it. It's like people have an idea of it. And right, it's funny, right? When we talk about living in a simulation, and we talk about becoming more authentic in order to really wake up, like what is this whole awakening journey? Like, one perspective is coming out of this illusory world and recognizing how much of it is just a projection of our subconscious. And so anyway, when we're taking an idea, when someone has like an idea of what a free spirited, spiritual, perhaps hippie, these are different definitions, but there's crossover and everything as with everything. But, when people have an idea of what that is, and then they just go for it based on something that they've seen someone else do, that ends up being fake, right? Like it can't not, like, nothing we're doing really is that original, like, for example, I mean, I joked about my tattoos before, but it's like none of my tattoos are that original. Like some of them a little more than others, but they're mostly like stuff that lots of other people on the planet have. Um, and it's like recognizing that and seeing like we're not that, yeah, we're not that original, and that's okay. But it's in accepting that rather than like doubling down and going deeper into another layer of false identity, of like taking on this new look and this new smell of like being an unwashed, hippie traveler, spiritual person. It's like maybe that's not the answer, because like I mentioned that anecdote before, from Ram Dass, who was talking to young guys coming back from Vietnam at the time, and saying like none of the women wanted to talk to them because they had short hair. It's like even though they were anti-war, they were pro environment. They were pro whatever they were at the time, psychedelic and stuff. they were they were not getting attention because they didn't have the aesthetic, because they just got out of the military and their hair was short in that example. So it's like, you see how we try and reject a system and its appearances and its values, and end up just recreating it in a slightly different way. It's just disguised in a different way. But if we don't do that internal work, we just continue. We repeat it. We recreate it in a different way, and on goes the cycle until we wake up. It's just swinging, a pendulum swinging from one end to the other. Um, but yeah, that the specific example of the personal hygiene, I was, because I was meditating on that, man. I was thinking about that. I was like, why are all these like guys from all over the world hanging out in Guatemala? Why are they not bathing for long periods of time? And I'm like, where did this come from? Like, why is that supposed to be so cool? And I was thinking maybe like, hippie revolution, 60s, 70s, people, as I was saying, like traveling around in vans and not really working. Okay, they didn't have access to a lot of running water. That makes sense that those hippies were like dirty back then. And like, cool. And again, teach their own. It's not like it's a bad thing to be that way, unless it's affecting your health, then maybe you'll consider that bad. But ultimately, it's just like, the conversation, I think, here is about being authentic as possible, and turning it on ourselves as well. But yeah, because I was like, man, what is the point? Like, why is that such an important part of this? Like, and again, yeah, I was like, I understand not using aluminum filled deodorant and perfumes and soaps with endocrine disruptors, but like, why does that mean that we can't use like, natural soaps? I just didn't understand why is that so important for people to smell so ripe walking around here. And yeah, it's like, if somebody arrives at that conclusion that they don't want to bathe for like, that's their personal choice, their authentic expression, and they've got like they've really thought about it, then like, cool. But if not, then maybe, just like everything else, let's take it as an opportunity to examine our motivations, to see where we are in relationship to what we are considering our journey, and to the people around us. Because yeah, then it's just another attachment, right? Like, being unwashed is just another attachment.
You know the song where it was like Alabama, Arkansas, I sure love my mom pot. Like they did it like a Tiny Desk way, way long ago. And I remember, great song, like love the song. But like, they're all like, yeah, kind of like the stereotypical hippies. And like I remember someone commented, they were like, I can smell this photo. And I was like, yeah, yeah, dude, like that's it, there's definitely a real, I mean, that was, early 2010s, but
Mm.
I was like, yeah, like, it's a real thing that's been perpetuated since the 60s and 70s. You know what I mean? There's
Still
this
going on.
reputation of like, yeah, it's still going on, and so I don't know what that is, but hopefully, again, just bringing awareness. It's like, doesn't, you
Yeah,
don't have to do that, right? You
yeah,
can slight slight pivots. We
yeah.
have
It's
we
like,
have the beautiful, the beautiful privilege of running water. Might as well
yeah,
use it every
yeah.
once in a while. Um, but and another thing too, man, is just that like uh I've seen a lot of addiction disguised as enlightenment,
Mm.
right? Where there's this like again, the performative nature where people are like, oh, I've done, ayahuasca this many times, or I've done mushrooms this many times, or I've dropped acid or DMT, or like, any of these things, which can be helpful tools and hopefully are heart opening for a lot of people. But again, at your own risk, and hopefully supervise with proper people, and in an environment that you feel comfortable in, and you're not just surrounded by people that don't care about you. You
Yeah.
have a bad trip, because then it can do the inverse, right? It can kind of like send you on a spiral, right? So I've seen a lot of people just use a new addiction and disguise it as enlightenment, right? Where maybe they had an issue with alcohol, or maybe they had an issue with harder substances, coke or meth, or I don't know, heroin, any of the harder stuff too. And then they find this other thing that's like not necessarily as bad, right? The psychedelic addictions aren't as invasive to the body, I would say, as and some of those harder substances, but it's still a crutch, that I've seen people lean on. Fortunately for myself, I've never abused them. I don't think to that extent, but have used them, right? And so it's just like, I just want people to be careful, right? Where the most important part of like any of those things, if you do them again and all that, where they're legal and proper care and all that stuff, right? Which there's some states I think in the U.S. where where that's happening, where there's like research being done and people can kind of go do that. I had a friend
Mm,
of mine, go do ketamine, right, under like therapy, like under supervised guidance
mm,
with a therapist, right? Which I was like, that's crazy. That who would have thought, 10 years
mm.
ago that would have even been possible. So there's cool stuff happening, right?
Yeah,
In this realm, and that's awesome. And another friend too, a friend of mine, his ex partner is doing some similar things out in Colorado as well. So like I know people in this world that are like doing cool work,
yeah, yeah.
um, and that's really great. But when you do that, the most important part is coming back to reality, right? The integration back into the real world, back in your day to day, and hopefully you take those lessons and integrate them into your life. But to continue to use these things, not that you can't like every once in a while, right? But it's like when people swap that in and they're like, doing them every weekend or,
Mm.
going on a bender, it's a slippery slope because I think you're just swapping one. And again, with the addictive personalities, and I have addiction in my family, y'all. Like I know that this is something that I've wrestled with my own genetics, with just the addictive personality. And so when people might be predisposed to these sorts of habits or addictions, and you swap a worse one for something else, and it's like great, like it's not as destructive maybe as alcohol or coke or any of those sorts of things, but it can still be harmful to you, right? It's still a crutch. It's still the abuse of a tool that in certain cases and scenarios can be very helpful to open the door to your heart, ideally, right? Um, and yeah, I just think it's yeah, don't get lost in that, I guess is what I was just what I hope to see. It's just the integration, right? Yeah, like I said, to wrap up my thoughts, man, just the integration back into the reality after you do something like that is the most important part. Is taking those lessons and applying them in the real world of your day to day, and without the extra substances and without the extra stuff going on in your life. So yeah, man, I think that's just my thoughts on that. But what do you think
Yeah.
about this the addiction disguised as enlightenment?
Well, I think it can easily fall into that when we are not examining our intention behind something, and when we are moving into that unconsciously, when it's still being guided by those external forces, those like trying to fit in essentially. Because ultimately, uh, doing any of those ceremonies can end up being just the same thing as going to church every week without, when someone's going to church for the, like as Yogananda put it, churchianity rather than Christianity, they're just kind of going for the sake of community and going through the ritual and then going back out into the world for the rest of the week and being an angry, disrespectful person who's easily triggered, who's taking advantage of other people. So just going through the motions, thinking that it's something external. It's like it's essentially it's the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's just a place to be careful, right? Like I've seen beautiful transformations, on retreats or whatever weekends or and but it's yeah, it's just a note to be careful of because those things can be not as destructive as maybe other substances, but they can also be destructive, or a crutch or dismantling to your life. So I
Lesser of
think
two evils for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, lesser of two evils, right? So
Yeah.
it's like I get the conclusions, right? I get the conclusions and I get the pivot, the switch up, and yeah, it's better than the other stuff, right? It's not as violent, it's not as destructive, it's not as that stuff, but it is a crutch, right? It is a crutch. So just to keep that in mind, right?
Yeah.
For any of those things, but
Yeah.
and then yeah,
So I was just gonna add, yeah, like if it becomes a crutch, like if it is which starts at the very beginning, is examining something. Is this something that someone feels that they need? If someone, because it's the same thing. It's the same thing as going to church and outsourcing your connection to God, thinking you need to go to a specific building and talk to a specific guy who's like the ordained middleman. It's like, you're missing the point entirely. That's starting off on the wrong path. If what you're saying you're trying to do is develop a personal connection with your creator, then that path is not starting you in the right direction at all. There's nothing wrong with it. It's like, it's just a different path. If that's where you're saying you're trying to go. So it's like, if someone's saying they're truly trying to develop themselves spiritually, they're trying to process their traumas, they're trying to come into a deeper connection with themselves and creation and with everyone else, and truly move on a path of self-realization, then engaging with any sort of practice needs to be done with the awareness that it is not the be all and end all. That whatever the practice is, whether it's a psychedelic journey in a plant medicine, in a country where that's legal, or if it's a sound therapy practice or whatever it is, it has to be done with the awareness that practice will be put down at some point to go beyond it, because ultimately everything we're talking about is going beyond form. So yeah, it's really the intention. And when we see a society like ours, a culture like ours, that's so obsessed with appearance, that's so obsessed with personality, that's so obsessed with celebrity, it's really easy to see how we get lost in the surface level stuff and think that, like, all I need to do is visit these places, attend these ceremonies, wear these clothes, wear this jewelry, not cut my hair, and perhaps in some cases not bathe, and I'm going to be that. And it's like, it's not how it works. It's not an outward in, it's an inward out. Like, the way out is in. It's one new age phrase that I do like is it's the universe is the you inverse, which I always like that one. That was cute. But yeah, it's like, yeah, just looking at where we're coming from, because if we're coming from the perspective that, like, if I do all of these things, then I'm gonna be that guy, I'm gonna be that person, I'm gonna be wherever it is I think I want to be. That's a long and arduous and confusing path if we're starting out that way. Just like thinking going to a specific building on a specific day, and paying some money is going to make you more connected with your creator. It's just the same level of confusion in a slightly different package. So, yeah, man, that's my thoughts there.
Yeah. And I think it's, we raised this before we hopped on, the question of, where do souls with options end up? Right. And people like go to Bali, or these different like destination, like spiritual locations. And it's like, because obviously, for you to if if you're from North America like we are, Canada or the US, it's like you have to have some sort of options to be able to fly internationally, right? Like, that's a privilege in itself to be able to do that. Huge privilege, right? To be able to do that, where, as if you're just like lost or whatever, you might be restricted to your hometown, or, the state that you grew up in. And, just because, it takes resources to hop on a flight and travel internationally and get a passport and all that stuff. Right. And so, ultimately, I think, it's like the classic song. It's like, everyone's just looking for love in all the wrong places. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, like Bali or Central America or South America, it's like, some of these places that have been, the new, or San Francisco in the 1960s, or, New York, parts of New York in the 1960s, and 70s. And it's like, these destination locations for,
Pilgrimage sites, really.
say that again?
Like pilgrimage sites.
Yeah, pilgrimage sites. Exactly, dude. Exactly. So it's like to go there and like you'll find yourself, and you become anew, and find a community and people that love you, and become the best version of yourself. It's like, hopefully, like, a lot of that stuff is hopefully you find what you're looking for. But then we point back to the alchemist, right? Where
Yep.
favorite book where it's like you go on this journey to find out, the answers were with you all along, and that maybe the place where you grew up in needs you the most, right?
Mm,
And needs your skills, needs your talents, because like that's the world you know best, right? And so it's like
yeah.
maybe you bring those lessons back to where you're from, and so yeah, man, because Lord knows we need it, right? In North America, and we need
Yeah.
a little bit more love, right? And so yeah, man, what do you think about that? We're just like these lost souls, and where they're drawn to these places,
Mhm.
and I think it's just yeah, again looking for love in all the wrong places, but
Yeah.
what do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I definitely it's the same thing as everything else, like the seeking something external. Like, oh, if I do this many types of therapy and this many types of ceremony, and I try this and I try that, and I visit these places, I got to go to like, yeah, I got to go to the all the temple sites around the world. It's like, sure, there's nothing wrong with that. It's all good, but like it's just what is the attachment that we are carrying before we go to those places? Because if we're carrying an attachment, it's probably gonna well, I mean, it's not probably, it's going to result in suffering because all attachment does. So thinking like I'm going to go to this place and I'm going to have this experience, it's like, yeah, you might, and they might try and go into like 10 major sites around the world, and you might have a profound experience at one of them. Like, there's no saying you're not going to, but when we have the expectation that something deep and profound is going to happen at these sites, it's like, well, we're definitely forgetting oneness, I think, because there's no difference between here and there. Ultimately, like everywhere is, everywhere is connected. Like the principle of non-locality with in quantum physics, and it's all, which is, to put simply, is everywhere in God's creation is God's creation. It's like it's all one. Um, and at the same time, like I said, like there's nothing wrong with going to those places, and you will meet the interesting characters. You will meet possibly some cool teachers. You will meet some charlatans, and that's all good, because that's all part of the journey. Recognizing that those teachers are charlatans is a part of your unfolding, or it can be. So yeah, man, it's a trip. And then like, but then it's also too, it's like I see the draw on so many levels, because so many of these places are special in a way. I mean, like, you get to some of these places and you're like, wow, you can feel a difference. Like there's an interesting energy about this place. The culture is brilliant. I mean, like, yeah, mentioning Bali, I was in Bali a few months ago. It was awesome. I was no past the point where I was going looking for something like that, but still
Yeah.
journeying there, because it's supposed to be a magical spot. Like,
Well, and
I mean,
cool to enter those places too with like a grain of salt as well, where it's like,
yeah, yeah,
like where it's like, you 10 years ago might have been like, hook, line, and
oh yeah,
sinker. Whereas like now it's like you can appreciate it, and but also with without no rose colored glasses,
yeah,
that you can kind of see it for what it is as well, and maybe appreciate it all the more because it's like you're not necessarily lying to yourself about like what
yeah.
you think it is.
For sure, and not gonna go there and, yeah, fall into any traps, really.
Right.
Like, you're gonna pay for some, I don't know, some like breathwork course by someone who doesn't know what they're doing, right? Like, something like that. It's just like, yeah, you can go and kind of observe uh a little more. I mean, I'm not claiming to see all of it, but like observe more of the full polarity. Like, see the beauty and the light and the dark, and recognize that it's all one, and it's all part of it creates that sort of pressure cooker when people go into it. It creates those kind of pressure cooker situations that end up pushing us out the other side and having learned something.
Yeah.
Um, because and just to speak on traveling specifically, it's like, just go places with no attachment. Just go knowing there's something's gonna happen. It's
Yeah.
like a lot of people like to go to India, right? Because I mean, I think specifically after I mean, obviously the entire history, but in the West, I think a lot of people were turned on by Ramdas' story, right? And everybody wants to go to Rishikesh and hang out and hang out in the Ganga and stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's you might not have a spiritual experience going to India, but you'll have an experience for sure because like it's culture shock at the very least. It's going to be a cool culture shock, which actually does end up expanding your awareness, which is it's kind of cool. Again, everything is always connected. It's always one. So we it's funny, right? It's it's like the unalome, right? That like the Buddhist symbol that a lot of people get tattooed, like the kind of the path that like waves in and out, but it ultimately comes back to the center. It's like no matter what we're doing, ultimately we can't miss, which is the funny part of the game. And when we see it so clearly enough, it really dissolves of fear because recognizing that whatever path we take, it's all good in the end. Like we can sit here and talk, in this episode about like what we, in retrospect, now perceive as pitfalls that we could have avoided or that we would possibly warn people about, which is the premise of this conversation here. But ultimately, it's like these are just helpful hints and helpful tips because you can't miss. That's the cool thing. That's the cool thing about it. No matter what, you might go way off and take a far longer, more arduous path, but ultimately that path leads back to the same place because it only can lead to one place because there is only one here. So keeping that in mind, I think it turns down the volume a lot of the stress involved, and yeah, but it's still like I still think the conversations are interesting. I think they're funny. I think it's really funny to like look at the comparisons and compare notes and see these things and get involved with them and then come out the other side and change our perspectives and be able to talk even more deeply on them. So it's it's fun. It's an ongoing game, and but yeah, ultimately there's nothing to worry about.
No, I would agree with that. Kind of a last point, which is touching on all these, right? Where, it's like, and you said the go inward, right? Where it's just like chasing a lot of these things that we see are external, right? It's like
Mm.
external aesthetic, external solutions, right? External sources of trying to again feel the love,
Yeah, yeah.
with others, right? With our community, with ourselves, right? Again, just looking for love, and truly, and again, still working on this with myself, y'all. I'm not saying this because it's like I know better than, I still have my moments where I slip up, but the self love, like you said, Adam, I think turns down the volume on a lot of this stuff, and coming to back to that place of remembrance. A lot of people, I don't know if anyone, listening, you look into near death experiences and it's like the
Mm.
people who die, maybe they're on the operating table in a car crash and the paramedic or, the doctor brings them back and then they have this overwhelming feeling of love. And is that just the DMT being released into our brain, as some people in the might have say it's like, oh, it's just, it wasn't real, it's just the DMT being released in your brain as you die. It's like, yeah, maybe, but at the
It's all the
same time,
same.
yeah, yeah, dude. It's all the same, and ultimately, that's really cool. That like we come from a place of love. We come
Mm.
here and we forget that we are love, right? That everyone is love. That we are one. And then when we pass, hopefully we return back to it, or and so I think that's just kind of like the theme of the human struggle. It's just like, oh, it's just like why some people feel lost. Unfortunately, I think why some people feel so lost when they come into this world, and you hear horrible stories of people committing suicide. It's just like because it's like we come if we come from love, and then there's this place that is so devoid of it. It's hard, right, for some souls, I think, to just be on earth, right? It's a hard
Yeah.
experience. It's very jarring, especially
It's
if you
hard for
come
all
from.
of us.
It's hard for everybody, dude. It really is. Do you think everyone's doing great? Is anyone like really like just peachy keen on being on earth, or is everyone kind of like awkward and insecure and lost and
Yeah.
looking for love and has good mental health, all that stuff, right? It's really jarring to be a human on earth, and like I understand all of that. I feel it too, right? Like I am one. I'm just like you are, whoever's listening. And so that's a crazy place to be. That's a crazy place to be. But so I think that's just the crux of all of us. It's just, we come from love. We're looking for it. We're searching for it in all these weird ways. And and Christianity is one way, and this New Age spirituality is another way. And we're doing these weird things to try to find that love that we come from, and that we'll eventually we will return to. And so with that, yeah, Adam, like it says, I have a lot of empathy for people. Yeah, it makes me laugh, right? Because it's like I don't take
Mm.
it so seriously. It's
Yeah.
like, if you don't laugh, you'll cry, sort of thing. So it's like you
Yeah.
might as well try and laugh at this stuff, um, and enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride, and hopefully, um, take those lessons in stride. And again, as I always say, it's like I am not perfect. Hopefully you
Mm.
resonate with the message, not necessarily me or Adam as a messenger, and because we are still stumbling and making our mistakes. And yeah, and again, like we said, trying not to judge, because who are we to judge anybody in this life?
Yeah.
But it
As
is
we
just,
talk about not bathing.
yeah, but it is funny to observe. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
It's fun to observe, and just be like, that's kind of a silly thing that we notice people doing, and what's up with that? And I think that's okay too. That's okay too. Um, but yeah, everyone, we do have noses, so yeah. But Adam, any closing thoughts for this episode of Oneself, and just what you've noticed in with this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's far out because it's like it. The closer it's looked at, I believe we just see that it's all a choice, right? Like, so it's like, okay, I'm gonna, move to Central America and to one of these like kind of spiritual communities and do all the ceremonies and wear the clothes and like wear the beads and whatever it is, walk around barefoot. Still like the barefoot part.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
yeah. Um, and like we'll do that until we
As long as
see
you
that
wash your feet.
yeah, oh dude, yeah. Well, that was the thing. I was like, I'm in the shower washing my feet like multiple times a day, like every time I enter the house, obviously. And but but yeah, it was nasty down there sometimes. But it's funny because it's like we recognize that it's ultimately always a choice. Like we'll run out that timeline, we'll run out that experience until we don't want to anymore. So it's like until and why would we choose to put something aside unless it was no longer working? And this is, I think, is an infinite process. But just to bring it to like the human perspective here on this, in our recent history, it's like we'll go to church, every Sunday, listening to the pastor, thinking that it's really going to make life better. Until we realize that that model doesn't really work, then we'll choose something different. And maybe it's going on this different new age spiritual path, follow the prescribed model, and until we recognize that it's not a one size fits all, it's a unique path, and then we'll choose differently. We'll recognize that doesn't work for us, we'll choose differently. We'll keep chasing love externally until we realize that it doesn't work, until we realize that it's, again, the alchemist journey, when it was right there within us all along. We keep going until we realize, and that's where we recognize suffering as grace, because that's what points us in the direction of our truth. And then ultimately, like it's a trip, because you get there and you go, wow, it was a choice the whole time. Like, wow, I was essentially choosing to suffer because I was denying my own truth. I was denying the love that is inside of me, pretending that it's not there in order to give me the experience of trying to find it in the external, which is, all the different things we've talked about in this conversation here. And then when you get there, it's like, oh my God, it's like, it's so simple. It was just there the whole time. And it was a choice. And this is where I can see, like, free will and suffering is a choice. And like, that's a hard pill to swallow when we're still in it and not seeing that stuff. And talking about all the layers of privilege and everything. Of course, that is a relevant conversation. But when we move beyond that and see like that everything is one and we're reflections of an infinite consciousness here that is simply going through this experience of experiencing itself through the process of forgetting in our case, um it's like, man, it was all a choice, and that's super far out because it's like it's so simple. But like, to get there, sometimes we choose to complicate it for the sake of the experience, which is all gravy too, man. So um yeah, again, comes back to like, we can't miss fear is an illusion. Love is love is all there is. Love is what we are. So yeah, it's fun. It's fun. That's what I'll
Yeah,
add.
yeah. Enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride of your life, right?
Yeah.
Folks, if you like what you heard, and you want to support us, please do any of the things that are free, like, comment, subscribe, share with a friend, leave a review on Apple or Spotify is super helpful to us as well. Any of those places. And we really appreciate that. Just helping us out. And yeah, unless you have anything further to add, Adam, we will wrap it up and catch everyone next week. Cool. All right, then we will catch you next week. Be well until then.
Take care.